Well, another US state blocks Donald Trump and the rise of Nikki Haley. Joining me live is electoral analyst and political consultant Aidan Smith. Aidan, a very happy new year to you, my dear friend. And interesting in US politics, we've just had a bit of a look back. What does this mean? The state of Maine, it's only small in sort of physical terms, but for Donald Trump, it's just another issue.
Yeah, and obviously this is a really fascinating way to cap off probably one of the strangest years in U.S. politics in recent memory, and that's saying a lot. So this is the first time in Maine where the state Secretary of State's office, Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, unilaterally took the measure to bar Trump from the ballot, citing the insurrection cause. And this contrasts with Colorado, where I believe it was the state Supreme Court that decided this as much. So there's a lot of questions about, the unilateral power of a state executive. In this case, in U.S. states, the Secretary of States is the top elections official in each state. And obviously, for Trump, this is yet another pretty odd, to say the least, legal battle. Odd in the sense that it's basically unprecedented, especially when combined with the various other legal scrutiny he's faced. And it will surely make for a really interesting dynamic going into 2024.
Do you think it's going to become too much for him?
I think that ultimately, I think it will be a big hindrance to his effort to win back the White House. But I think even despite all this, polling probably indicates that if the election were held today, that despite all this legal scrutiny, Trump probably would win if the election was held today. Obviously, a really odd dynamic. And I think the main thing was going to be whether the Supreme Court actually rules in favor of Trump in this battle, or if they just kick it off until 2025.
Now, Nikki Haley, she still trails Donald Trump, but we're talking about a long period of time and things can happen quickly in US politics. Everyone was hovering around her answer the other day on the Civil War. For me, it wasn't so much what she said, but it was more the reaction that people are really taking notice. She's making an impact.
Definitely. I mean, I think that for most of early 2023, people saw DeSantis as either prior to his official announcement or after he announced as the de facto biggest threat to Trump in the Republican primary. Haley, the fact that she's really surged in some of the key early states, I think a lot of people's ideas that even if she polls well behind Trump nationally now, if she ends up, pulling an upset victory in something like New Hampshire or even a close second place, that could theoretically see her really surge across the nation, as has been the case in kind of other primary dynamics where we've had unexpected national primary victors. And I think that, the fact that Haley's comments have received attention from people like DeSantis, from a lot of Trump world, definitely shows that they see her as probably the single biggest non-Trump actor in the Republican primary. And if I were to guess, I do think that she'll end up being pretty firmly in second place by the time polls actually come to, voting.
The irony is that if Nikki Haley was up against Joe Biden, she'd almost definitely win.
Definitely. I think that a lot of Biden world is conscious of this, is that Trump's has obviously the unique strengths of having a very, very solid and loyal voting base, to say the least. But also among the general electorate, he is less popular than what we would call average Republican. Pollsters usually put up the topic of average or median Republican if they're going to face off against Biden in an opinion poll. And they'll do the same with Trump, where it'll be like generic Democrat versus Trump. It's clear that both Biden and Trump actually poll weaker than the median or what we call generic nominee of their parties. If Biden was up against someone like Haley, Haley would almost certainly win. I think the converse is that if Trump was up against a different Democrat, even someone like, I don't think he's even the strongest nominee by any means, but someone like Gavin Newsom or something like that, I think Newsom would probably be favored against Trump. But the fact that both parties' nominees are pretty unpopular with the general public is what's really going to make it such like an icebreaker of an election, in the sense that any movement at the last second in terms of if there's a crisis in October 2024 or if the economy declines, then that could push one candidate over the edge, I think.
What about migration? It's a massive, massive issue. A lot of people on the border of the United States Donald Trump, when he was president, said he was going to build a wall. Of course, that never happened. It's going to be that and the economy, big issues, aren't they, for the election?
Definitely. I think specifically, we've seen in the last year, it hasn't really been reported on as much of like a top media story yet, in my opinion. But a big thing is actually the migration from Cuba, which I believe exceeds numbers we even saw in 1981. That was the famous year of the Mario boat lift, where you really saw mass exodus of Cuban refugees from the nation during like the height of the Castro regime. I believe that a really large, something like 3% of the Cuban population arrived at the US-Mexico border in 2023 alone, or something like 2021 to 2023. And I think that going forward in the next year, that will be a really interesting dynamic, because the new exodus from Cuba seems to be, we focused a lot in recent years on exodus from Central America, but I think the new influx of Cubans seeking refuge in America, kind of the first time in decades where that's been this massive phenomenon, will be a huge issue going forward next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Aidan, have a great new year. We will talk to you in 2024.
Thank you so much.